So, in the first lecture, we talked about definitions of interest groups and talking largely about the impact that interest groups have on our democratic republic. Now, we want to talk about our two important issues related to interest groups and how they do what they do. One is the search for members from our perspective and also from their perspective. And then we're also going to talk about what interest groups do with the resources that they are able to collect and how do they try to influence public in ways. So the first one is thinking about the idea of why do people join interest groups? According to the definition of an interest group, or even the idea of it, would be one that this shouldn't even be an open question. The reason you join an interest group is because you're interested in it, because you share that interest. You find other people who like guns, who like kitty cats, who like knitting, or a more specialized one that does knitting for kitty cats and knitting, whatever it might be. You find a group that you share a common interest with and you join that interest group. But actually, it's a little more complicated than that. The idea of passion is certainly an important part of motivated to join a particular interest group. But at the same time, what we find is that a number of interest groups should have bigger memberships. More people actually agree with the positions taken by a number of interest groups, for example, than actually join those interest groups. So for example, we talked about a little bit earlier the idea of the Sierra Club or the World Wildlife Federation or even Greenpeace. The number of people who agree that something needs to be done about climate change, need to be done about the ways in which a number of species of plants and animals are being destroyed because of human interactions and things like that, is much larger than the number of people who are card-carrying members of the Sierra Club or the World Wildlife Federation or of Greenpeace. And so what we need to understand is why there is that gap, why it is not enough just to have this common impulse of passion, framers said, that there's a larger dynamic that's going on. And so what we want to do is to talk about the ways in which the passion isn't enough. And the way to understand this is to think about this in terms of an economics problem, in terms of reason. I was pursuing a PhD in economics and then decided instead to get a PhD in political science. So I often find it useful to use basic economic reasoning. And one of these that applies to interest idea of the free rider problem. The free rider problem is that, again, there are more people who agree with the actual goals of an interest group than the number of people who actually join that group. And the number of people who share an interest with the group but don't actually pay to become official members of that are called free riders, because those individuals will benefit if the Sierra Club, if the World Wildlife Federation, the NRA, the American Association of Retired Persons are successful in advancing that cause. Then the people who support that cause will be happy. But they'll even be happier using sort of economic reasoning if they got away with it without actually having to pay the membership dues. And so that's called the free rider problem. And to understand it, we have to take a step back and understand a distinction between public goods. Public goods, well, let's start with private goods. They're ones that we often don't define even because they're so painfully obvious. But a private good is a good that once it is produced, the individual who is paid for it gets to keep it. So it's a good, it's a service. So for example, if I go and see that there's a $5 meatball sub at Subway, I will go in, pay my $5 and get the Subway sandwich, and that is a private good. I get to keep it. If I want to have one bite and throw it in the garbage because I'm reminded again that Subway has terrible food, I can do that. If I want to give it to someone else, I can go ahead and do that. If I want to eat it myself, I can do that. Whatever I want to do with it is mine because it is mine. I own it. I own it because I paid for it. And that's a private good. It's the same thing with getting a haircut, getting your car worked on, all of those things. Those are all private goods, private services, and they're the ones that economics spends a lot of time talking about. But there's another category of goods called public goods, and public goods are those that once the good is produced, then the people who produce it cannot necessarily exclude those individuals who haven't paid for access to that. And so an example of a public good is one that you probably know and aren't necessarily aware of, is the idea of many of you have seen, and I know this is true, because that pretty much 98% of the people on the entire planet know Big Bird, Oscar the Grouch, and all the people on Sesame Street. Sesame Street, for the longest time, was on public television. It's public television, and that means that even if you're not contributing to public television, you can still watch Sesame Street. It's not the same with HBO. With HBO, it's a subscription service. If you don't pay for that subscription or steal the login from your friend or your family, you aren't able to watch that. And in fact, if you do get the login from your friends or your family and HBO decides to clamp down on that, that could cause problems because that is breaking the terms of service. Whether they take it to jail, take it to court or not, we don't know. But it is one that HBO is a private good. Only those individuals who pay for it legally get access to it. Whereas public television is one that the way in which public television is paid for, if you've turned on public television, you see those fund drives interrupting your Sesame Street watching with a bunch of old boring people talking about how you need to pledge money to give money to it because the funding for all these programs come from, and that is a public good. Because once produced, once it is actually put out into the airwaves, PBS, the public broadcasting system, can't distinguish between those who have actually paid for it and those who haven't. And so in that sense, public goods have a different dynamic. You can't just charge a certain price. And so it causes some real problems for those who study economics. The study of public goods is one. It's in fact one of the areas where even libertarians will argue that there should be a role for government, that the libertarian ideology is one that argues the government that governs best is that which governs least, and they believe that a small government is the way to go and that individual freedom. But there are some times when government is needed, even for libertarians, and one of those is the provision of these public goods. And so why are we talking about this in terms of interest groups? Well, the interest groups themselves, the activities, if they're successful, are public goods. So if the Sierra Club is successful in going to Congress, because Congress is talking about wanting to open up the Arctic to drilling and oil exploration. And if in fact the Sierra Club hears about this, which they will hear about this, they will then send lobbyists to go to Congress to try to stop it. They'll particularly go to the House of Representatives because there are more Democrats there, and they will try to stop any legislation about drilling in the Arctic wilderness. And if the Sierra Club, in its actions of hiring a lobbyist, of going to the EPA, of going to state governments even to try to have them fight, if they go to Alaska and try to stop in the Alaska legislature access to drilling of the Arctic wilderness, if the Sierra Club is successful in what they're trying to do, then that success is available for everyone. There is no more drilling in the Arctic wilderness. And that means that if you agree with that, then if you didn't pay to join the Sierra Club, you're free riding. You're taking the work club did to make sure that this thing that you agree with happens, but you didn't pay for it. So in this sense, the idea of public goods is one that influences the activities of interest groups. And furthermore, it means that a lot of individuals are themselves free riders, that they take advantage of the situation, that from a very selfish point of view, the best scenario is a Sierra Club is successful because I actually agree with the protection of the environment, but I don't have to join the Sierra Club because then I save those membership dues. And so it's a win-win for me. But the problem is if enough people make the same calculations, then the Sierra Club doesn't have the level of resources that it needs to be successful in what it wants to do. And so that becomes the problem. And many interest groups face this free rider problem because the activities of the interest group are public goods. And so they have to come up with a solution to be able to find ways to get people to join the Sierra Club, to join the American Association of Retirees, even the Alumni Association. When you graduate from California State University Long Beach, they're going to want you to join the Alumni Association. And if the Alumni Association is successful in terms of maintaining the goodwill and good name of Cal State Long Beach and providing scholarships for people in the future who come to Cal State Long Beach and maintain the reputation of it, it will help you because when you tell people that you got your degree at California State University Long Beach, it'll be a thing of pride instead of trying to change the subject like, is that a bunny over there? Instead, you'll talk about the ways in which you're proud of the beach and proud of the education that you got and that it continues this strong tradition because the Alumni Association is able to give resources to giving them opportunities to study abroad or to provide scholarships or to provide other opportunities for people to maintain the great education you're getting at California State University Long Beach. So in those ways, the activities of even the Alumni Association, which is an interest group to advance the interests of those who have Long Beach and have a degree from there, that they want to maintain that reputation. But Again, if they're successful and you don't give money to Cal State University Long Beach Alumni Association, you get the benefits without actually having to pay for the costs that are necessary, because things cost money to be able to have those scholarships to do all those different activities. And so what interest groups have come up with are called selective incentives. They are things that take what is a public good and try to transform it into a private good. And that is that there are certain benefits you get only from membership. So if you are a card-carrying member of the American Association of Retired Persons, I will get certain things. If you are a card-carrying member of the Sierra Club, you will get certain things that those who are not members. And so, for example, for the Alumni Association, which is just worth thinking about because a number of you are graduating in the near future, and all of you will be graduating at some point, is the idea that the California State University of Long Beach will come up with selective incentives to be able to encourage you to join the alumni. So, for example, if you're part of the Alumni Association, then you will be able to have cheaper car rental rates. You will get access to health and life insurance at reduced rate. There will be activities that only card-carrying members are allowed to do. So talking about the Sierra Club, that they have a number of excursions that are available only to people who are card-carrying members, and you get that discount and do that. And even business organizations, so if you have something along the lines of an organization dealing with farmers, that part of joining a specific group might be that they will get access to the newest seeds that are available, or get techniques from the different fertilizer companies and things like that, that only those who are official members of the group will get those benefits. The problem is that that solution is not a complete solution to the problem, because the selective incentives that you come up with cost money. So negotiating cheaper car rental rates, or getting cheaper access to health insurance, or providing access to farmers to get the better seed variants and things like that. Or what they do for public television is, if you join public television, you get a coffee mug, or you get an umbrella, or things like that, or a tote bag. All of those things cost money, so you're spending money to hopefully raise money. And the hope is that in spending a little bit of money, you'll get a large number of people to join. The problem is that these selective incentives typically only matter if, in fact, you're sort of indifferent, if you're on the border there. It's hard to use selective incentives to get people to change significantly. If they have no interest in Sierra Club, or it really is something that they really can't consider themselves doing, even though they agree with the ideas of the Sierra Club, it's hard to know and hard to believe that simply having some great excursions, or some cheaper rates on car rental, or having a tote bag is going to get people to join. So it's not a perfect solution, but it is one that is attempted by, in and of itself, takes resources in order to raise resources. And what we want to do next, in the next part, is to think about the ways in which this free rider problem doesn't exist equally for all different types of groups. Some groups need to do it and other groups don't. And so that in the textbook, they talk about the difference between public interest groups and private interest groups. And it's the public interest groups that face the free rider problem, because what they do primarily are public goods, whereas private interest groups are ones that can avoid this, and therefore they have more resources available to fight the good fight, whatever that fight might be, to make more money for the doctors who are part of their organization, to be able to maintain the tax subsidies that oil companies get for doing oil exploration, or whatever those things might be. And so part of where we're moving to is a big talking about is the idea of interest groups, and the idea of pluralism makes a lot of sense theoretically. But if certain groups are more successful, are able to join groups that are more individuals, then it creates political inequality and economic inequality. And so that is a problem for democracy, because political equality is part of the democracy standard. So what we're going to do is talk about the difference between public interest groups and private interest groups, and why public interest groups have a more difficult time getting their stuff done, getting their agenda met by the government officials, than those who are fighting for private interests.